Some other considerations. Let's consider that we are all human beings. My experience of that is we will take other people's criticism on in part. The question becomes, how much of that do we take on a scale of 1 to 10? Is it a 10 or is it a 1? 10 being the most and 1 being the least. Do we slowly move down the scale of how much responsibility we take on for other people's experiences of us? We'll consider that. The human factor here is, in part, we'll take on aspects of what other people experience about us. And for me, there's a beautiful purpose to that. And it's twofold. On one end of the spectrum, if we notice that what someone is sharing about their experience of us, whether it be a positive judgment or negative judgment, if we can notice that that is their experience projected onto us, that is their experience of themselves projected onto us, we get to play with the idea that this person might be highly critical toward themselves. And this person, because of that internal criticism, may actually feel very insecure. And how does a person who feels very insecure create a sense of security? Maybe by criticizing others. So if you can play with the idea of how old might this person be when they're criticizing me emotionally, that can help you actually increase the amount of compassion and empathy that you have for where this person is at, what they're going through, who they are internally. How often do they criticize themselves? That is not to say that we need to discount our own feelings. We want to feel our feelings about their criticism, and we want to explore them, just like in part 1. Their projection. We can let them own their projection. On the flip side of that, can we be extremely curious? Can we be curious about how much truth is in their projection for us? I.e., I hear your criticism. It doesn't feel true to me, and I'm curious about it. I'm curious about how much is actually true there. And I'll sit with that for a while and start to explore how much of others' projections are actually truths about me, not only their projections of themselves projected onto me. So that's another place we can explore. Another interesting twist on this. Notice, how often are you self-critical? How often do you celebrate yourself through criticism? In part, I notice I can be pretty critical of myself. And when others are critical of me, it may simply be reminding me of how often I'm critical of self and how painful that is. It feels perceptually more painful coming from this external world. But if I sit with that and find, how often am I as critical of myself as I experience this person to be of me, then we start to really unlock some deep roots as to where our self-criticism comes from. So the last and final question for now to answer the question would be, would you be willing to explore when you're self-critical? Whose voice are you hearing? Are you hearing your experience of your mother? Or are you hearing your experience of your father? Or are you hearing your experience of someone in your younger days? As far back as you can remember, who do you remember criticizing you initially? And what part of you took on that voice and has kept it on your shoulder everywhere you go from that moment on? And could the external world's criticism of you be a reminder of how often you are criticizing self? And maybe one of the real keys to getting out of taking on the responsibility of others' criticisms from the external world is to find where you self-criticize. And as you start to connect with those parts of self and integrate them and acknowledge and heal and work with, your experience of the outside world's criticism will go from a 10 to a 5 to a 4 to a 3, and typically sit somewhere in that 3 to 1. So those are some ideas around how not to take criticism personally. I hope these were helpful. I hope you all got to criticize some of my offerings. And I hope you each notice when you were being critical of me. What does that mean about you? All right, my friends. Next question coming up. See you next week.